Let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons combat. I'm going to explain to you how I do combat. I'm not going to give you any advice. If you take something from this video, great. Now let me clarify something. I started running D&D in 1991, and I have ran thousands of combat encounters, just so you know my background. And another point that I must clear up, I have never, ever, not even once have I used miniatures in a grid to do combat. Because I do pure theater of the mind, I am constantly running my imagination. So, leading up to the combat encounter, the entire picture is in my mind. Where the characters are, where the enemies might be, in comparison to where the characters are. I have that all laid out inside of my mind before I get to the combat encounter. If you are not used to really picturing things in your mind through your imagination, in a lot of cases it won't just turn on. So one thing you have to do is turn it on artificially, like force it on, focus on, going into the imagination and doing it. And after a short period of time, a few sessions maybe, you'll start instinctively picturing things in your mind. It becomes a habit, but you have to create the habit. The good news is it doesn't take months. It doesn't take years. It can take 2, maybe 3 sessions. The more you run the imagination, the more you can maintain a scene inside of your mind. It's quite easy. And it's good because you're going to go back to that scene to remember where people are, right? So when you're trying to remember where the character is compared to the monster, as long as you're allowing things to move in that scene, like, as you're getting information, the monster has moved, from this tree to this rock. Now you keep all that in your mind. And whenever you're getting new information, you're going to go back to that image of where everyone is. And if you're comfortable with running your imagination, you're going to be surprised how well you can maintain the image of the scene. And that allows you, with almost no effort, to remember everything because your memory is in the scene. So every time you're picturing it back in your mind, well, now the monsters have moved to here, and the characters have moved to here, and you can see it clearly. Well, Condor, I could imagine that works for 5 monsters and maybe 5 characters, but what happens when you get to encounters where it's like 20 or 30 enemies? Scaling up the numbers does not make it impossible or hard. When you're using miniatures in a grid, you're also going to be keeping, track on paper through notes how many enemies have been killed and whatnot. Well, guess what? You keep track of that stuff when you're doing pure theater of the mind in the same way. You still have a piece of paper with the number of enemies, marked down, where you can scratch down how many have been killed, and you should be tracking that just like somebody would if they were using miniatures in a grid. You're just using theater of the mind. And the imagination is the board, right? And the pieces are all imagined as well. Every so often during combat, even with miniatures in a grid, the Dungeon Master is probably going to give you an update as to where the fight is at this stage. How many enemies are left, what's going on. Well, guess what? You do that with theater of the mind as well. Like, you want to describe everything to the players, you want them running their imagination as well. And how you help yourself and them is every so often, you give an update as to where the fight is, maybe at the start of a new round. You make it quick. Never make a long-winded speech about how many enemies are left. Don't let that drag on. Don't let that become an issue. Speak quickly, get it done, go right back into the imagination and back into the fight. In my honest opinion, once someone is comfortable with theater of the mind combat, they'll probably not want to go back to miniatures in a grid because what they'll find is it speeds combat up. And they'll also find that they are capable of doing it, which many people in the hobby are convinced that you really can't do it that well. Maybe because they're not capable. They haven't went that far and tried that hard at it. Maybe they tried and failed. Or maybe the way they do it in their mind is good enough. And so screw how you do it. Now, that is not the end of how I run combat, right? So once you're comfortable with theater of the mind and you find that it's actually easy to do, which it is, it might take, a minute to learn this thing, but once you get it down, there's all kinds of other things that I will start doing in a fight. Like, I like to express the enemies. Some enemies will be yelling, some will be smiling as they're running up. Like, it will be chaos, and I'll make sure that chaos is being felt, but I also want to let the players know that these monsters do have personalities, right? Some might be stupid, some might be aggressive. I'll make some notes of that, when I'm putting together the combat encounter, of course. Or I'll randomly apply that and just make some quick notes at the start of the combat, as we're going into it. Some of these guys over here aren't that bright, or these guys over here are more capable, or what have you. And then apply some personality traits that would fit people like that, or a being like that. And then just go ahead and throw that in there. And I like to make sure I'm role-playing during the combat scene. So, I give a lot of description. Like, I look at hit points as a measurement of the body. And I know that old D&D guys don't do that. I do personally. Because I don't see, like, just say as you get more hit points going up. I don't see it as, like, the body growing. What it becomes to me is it's harder to hit you and do fatal damage as you gain more hit points. That's what it's telling the world. Like, at level 1, you're not that experienced. So hitting you with a sword, it's a lot easier to do a lot of damage to your body. But at level 10, well, you're much better. You're more experienced at avoiding fatal damage like that. So what I could do to your body at level 1, I can't do that well or that easy at level 10. I'll need an attack that does a major amount of damage because you're good at avoiding most fatal damage. That's the point. It's not that the body is getting bigger. It's just that the character is getting better at avoiding damage. Now, it's important to point all this out because this is how I paint the picture when it comes to combat. When you're taking damage, it's going to be on the body, and I'm going to describe that. Both what you're doing to the monster and what the monster does to you. And I'll even have the monster reacting, like, through facial expressions, maybe saying something to you in a language that you can't understand. I'll expect you, if you want and feel it, to say something back or make a noise or role play it out so the scene is more colorful, more interesting, and not boring. Some have argued with me with the way I look at hit points and deal with combat, like, well, how many times can you say that guy cut the arm? Well, I'm like, that's just simple-minded thinking. I can cycle through many ways of saying the damage is caused to your body without having to repeat that, a certain statement for like at least, 5-10 sessions. And then I may repeat, like, you get cut in the stomach in the same way you got cut in the stomach in this previous fight. But to me, that's realistic because that can happen. I just don't want to consistently be repeating this stuff. So I would agree with the criticism. How many times can you say this before it gets boring, right? Like you're saying hit, miss, miss. Well, you're saying, oh, he cut you in the arm, he cut you in the arm, he cut you in the arm repeatedly. Well, that's an issue. But I don't do that. I don't know people that do pure theater of the mind combat that are limited in that way. People that I know that are capable of doing this, like, they can always come up with a new way of describing how the damage is taken to the body and how the body is affected, right? And I like to add details like you feel the warm blood, going down your body from where the wound was made. I want that to be felt. I want to remind you about the weather. I'll tell you if it's raining. I'll tell you about the smell of the grass and the trees and the smell of the blood as it comes out of your body, like going up into your face, right? I want you to feel combat. I want that to be an entire experience, and I want it to be something we're role-playing, not just something we do and then we go back to role-playing. No, combat to me is no different than social interaction. It's role-playing. I never treat monsters like machines, meaning the goblin might have taken you down and maybe he should just end you, but he's not. He's going to piss in your face, right? Or he's going to laugh and walk over you like you're nothing. Like, just stupid confidence, right? A cocky confidence the goblin shouldn't have, but will carelessly leave you there. And then sometimes when you think the goblin wouldn't kill you, wouldn't end you, I might have the goblin end you. Now, do I use a chart or anything like this when I'm coming up with these random, reactions to what's going on by the monsters. No, I feel everything out. I never use a chart, when it comes to how will the monster react to what's going on. Like in old D&D, I don't use the moral system, for deciding if a monster will run away from the characters. No, I use common sense. If you're overwhelming an enemy and they're the type that can be cowardly, well, there's a good chance, just based on what you're doing, I'm going to have some of them run away from you scared. Yeah, I used to use charts for a lot of things, like a lot of old school dungeon masters. But in reality, I've become confident with my randomness, right? With what I come up with off the top of my head. And my players, I never have players that complain about, my decision making, like how it works out. So I'm confident in what I'm doing, and my players are not giving me a negative reaction where I'm not using charts and just making decisions. They trust me. And that's important that you have the trust of your players, of course. I truly believe it's because I can apply the complexity that players want without using the charts to force that complexity in there, right? If you're being too simple-minded, well, you might need charts. But if you're not, and you have a mind that is good for game mastering, well, you shouldn't need charts for almost anything, even reactionary rolls, to be honest. I don't really need them, right? I can just look at the scene, and I'm willing to do interesting things. I'm not just a one-way thinker. I'm not a simple-minded person. So I don't have this one reaction that, could be coming from the monsters. In my mind, I look at the situation, and I can apply all kinds of reactions from a group of monsters. They might even leave you alone. They might be on their way back from the hunt. They're tired, and if you simply don't make an action, even if they see you, they keep walking. That's it. And if I feel that's what's going on, well, I don't need a chart. I just let it happen. And if you think Theater of the Mind combat is not a consistent thing that you can do, well, let me be clear with you. I haven't had an issue with Theater of the Mind combat since 1993, and I have been consistently running these games right up until now. Like, right now, in person, I have 12 players, 2 different groups. They're each, made of 6 players. That's the 12 in total. There's no crossover. There's no situation where this player is also playing in this game. It's 12 different people. I run both groups twice a month, right? So that's 4 sessions a month, and that is what I'm currently doing. Now, what is the big secret to Theater of the Mind? Well, it's the imagination, right? And maybe you don't work out your imagination too well. Maybe it doesn't just, get going when you want it to get going. Let me give you a technique. If you're a new Dungeon Master or even an experienced Dungeon Master, really doesn't matter. But I want to give you a technique. Once or twice every week, I want you to find some time to listen to some music without watching anything, without looking, just look at the wall if you have to, right? And I want you to do it from about a half an hour to an hour each time. Just squeeze that time in. And I want you to look at this like you're working out that imagination muscle. And what you're going to do is when you listen to that music that you like for an hour or half an hour, you're going to try to tell a story, maybe about yourself. Right, something going on, you're getting a revenge, whatever. In your mind, you're going to picture what you're doing or what the place is. But you're just going to run the imagination. It doesn't matter how you do it, but do it. And you want to do this twice a week. Well, I guarantee after a couple weeks of doing this, go run a game. And then try to use your imagination, and it will shock you how well it works. There. That is how I run Theater of the Mind combat. I threw some tips in there that I hope help you. A little bit of advice, but really just wanted to explain to you how I do this. Because I've had a lot of people ask me, not my advice on Theater of the Mind combat, but simply how I do it. Well, there you go. For now, take care. You know what you can do? You can hit the like button. You can share the video. Oh, and there's another button you can press. That one that lets you subscribe to my channel for more content. Oh yeah, there's that bell thing. You can press that so you know when I've uploaded a new video right away.